Hello, everyone, and welcome to the sixth in a series of masterclasses run by the LERO Consortium. This particular masterclass is about addressing inclusion and inequities in the drug and alcohol treatment and recovery services, and is presented by Sohan Sahota and Hannah Litt. I have an apology to make. I was in charge of pressing the record button on Zoom and failed to do so until about slide 5. So what I thought I would do is just show you their early slides to give you context in this first part 1, and then you'll join the presentation fairly soon. You haven't missed very much into it, but you'll then get the full discussion afterwards. So the presentation, the aim of the presentation was to address the challenges faced by marginalized, excluded, and underrepresented groups seeking drug and alcohol treatment and recovery support. And Sohan's background that he gave me was it pointed out that despite the existence of key policies such as the Equality Act and the National Drug Strategy, the NHS long-term plan, many individuals from Black and South Asian communities remain underrepresented in treatment and recovery services. And systemic barriers, cultural stigma, historical mistrust of healthcare systems all contribute to that issue and result in significant disparities in access to care. Equality, diversity, and inclusion are crucial in ensuring that treatment services are equitable and responsive. And while policies are in place, gaps in implementation often hinder their effectiveness. There's a pressing need for culturally specific programs that cater to the unique needs of these communities, eliciting trust and engagement through tailored interventions. So the presentation slides begin, as you can see, with the first slide and the title "Decolonisation and Recovery." And the two presenters were Sohan, who's well known to the LERO community in the UK, who's the co-founder of Back In and a lived experience expert with decades of experience in this area. And Hannah Litt is a cultural and decolonisation strategist who led much of the discussion. So they began by highlighting key terminology and discussing those. And you can see in the following slide some definitions to inform the rest of the presentation. But the beginning of the presentation really started with this slide about data and highlighting a number of key facts that come from the treatment system, the treatment world, and about the impact of exclusion from services. And Hannah and Sohan talked around these stats, just really getting them out there to get people to think about and frame the issues that they wanted to discuss in the wider presentation. Hannah talked a lot about the fact that this isn't a policy gap. The policies are all there, but the problem is in implementation. And as the slide says, there is a power gap. The system knows exactly what the issues are, but the gap is not knowledge, it's power. And that Hannah's point was that consultation isn't co-production. Equality impact assessments have become paperwork exercises, and we need to keep challenging the idea that excluded populations are invited to the table, but only after decisions are made. And that's not power sharing, that's performance. So the start of the presentation that you'll join in a minute is started with this quote, which I think speaks for itself, that too often people in Sohan and Hannah's community are reduced to statistics, and that is just another way of dehumanizing people. So I'm not doing these slides at all justice, but I think this is where the you will join the presentation and you can hear Hannah and Sohan talk about it much more articulately. These slides will be available afterwards if you want to see them.
We don't need to have more conversations about this. There isn't a gap in knowledge, it's a gap in power. It's a gap of actually who is sitting at the table, who is holding the power. It sits within the institutions. It doesn't sit within the communities. We can see how leadership is still gatekept, and the biggest I think when I started to speak to Sohan is I was really shocked and really upset that actually all of these years on, Sohan is still fighting to be seen as a human being, essentially within the sector and outside of the sector. So what we have to remember is that the equality impact assessments, essentially they're tick box exercises as far as we are concerned as a community. And actually consultation should also, we can sit here and we can talk and share lived in experiences, but where is that co-production? Because otherwise it means absolutely nothing. And what we're looking is actually who sits at the table, who is holding power, why are all of these policies and pieces of research they've been done, but actually what is the outcome of that? Are we seeing people's lives get better? Are we seeing more people access the service? And if not, then actually it's not a policy gap that we have, it's a power gap, because essentially a policy is a piece of paper. What are we doing to bring it to life? So Han, over to you.
Yeah, regarding the policies, and I don't personally, I've not seen them kind of put into action. It looks good on paper, looks good on organizational sort of annual reports and everything like that. But in reality, and then what you said, Anna, it's about power. There's a power issue, and we know what's wrong, and we know how to fix it, but we need the kind of resources which we will talk about in a bit. And quite often we're told, don't look at what's wrong, look at what's wrong. We will talk about what's wrong because we need to look at what's wrong within our communities. When it comes to treatment, recovery, and rehabilitation, it's all wrong. Everything is wrong about it.
And I think what was really important that we know, and if you don't take anything else from today, please take this, is that we keep getting invited to the table after the decisions have been made to take the lived in experience. But where is the co-creation? Where is the power shift? Because that's not power shifting, it is performance. So we can
Just
sit in a room and be asked, but actually after them, where is the power shift here?
just to add to that, Hannah, we have been around the table and we have contributed heavily. We have consulted the communities on behalf of Public Health England in Nottingham, and we gathered the people. They have spoken. They have said what they wanted, what they need, and what was on offer was not what they need. And the recommendations from those consultations, they don't see daylight. And that's a problem. Where does that information go? Because that information from community voice is important to shape service specs. It is important for commissioning decisions to be made, but it hasn't reached the table. It hasn't reached, the recommendation stage. Recommendation, then action. And a lot of that's happening. Information is getting lost along transit. It's getting lost in translation. Deliberately, we could say we don't know.
And I think it's really important to know that actually at this point that has been done purposefully. It's not an accident. It's being done purposefully at this point. And the overall message that comes through to this community is we do not care if you die or if you live. So it's really, really important, because what this is dehumanization. And when we look at dehumanization across the globe, what's happening right now, we can see how bad it can get. And we all have a responsibility.
We do. We all have a responsibility, and everybody's kind of complicit in what's happening and what's not happening. We all have a voice. We talk about user voice. Where's our voices as professionals, as service providers? Everybody kind of seems to get quiet or roll their eyes when we talk about these issues. And we're losing lives at the end of the day. And we need to have these honest conversations. And what it comes down to is money at the end of the day. Money that's already invested into treatment services. It needs to be taken out and reinvested in community-led sort of provision. People who can do the job, who are not just tick boxing, who are not just there for the optics.
100%. Next slide. So I'm going to just hand over to Sohan, but I just wanted to say, and Sohan's just going to talk about some, real life experiences. I can talk about mine further on through the session, but too often we see people in our community, our loved ones, our children, our parents, our siblings, reduced to stats, which is why I wanted everyone to just sit with it at the beginning of the session. And please just be aware, this is just another way to dehumanize a community that already are dehumanized.
Yeah, I mean, rather than speak about one sort of case study or peer experience, if I just kind of generalize in a way, by the time people, service users, get to our service, they're usually in a crisis, in a terrible mess, a mess that's come about due to consequences of not getting the right treatment at the right time or not getting the support at the right time. And it's very difficult for the team to kind of deal with that because it's a serious multiple crises. For example, if you look at alcohol, for example, some of the damage, some of the liver cirrhosis, for example, pancreatitis, for example, all of that could have been prevented. There's a failing system that has led that deterioration, that consequence up until this point. And these people, obviously, what I mean, they're in a lot of pain. There's not much you can do for them, really, because if you got cirrhosis of the liver, you got very little chance. You can have a transplant, but that's that's dependent on the rest of the organs. If the rest of the organs in the body are not in good shape, for example, and we've had people die in some of the most horrific ways, and we've seen families distraught, sat by their bedside. Doctor saying, you got 7 days. Do what you need to do, right? Yeah, we're going to have to turn the machine off. You know what I mean? They're not going to make it. And these are some of the stories, some of the incidences, right? Yeah, that mainstream we don't really talk about. And when people like me, Hannah, and a few others, right, yeah, raise this issue, it's like it falls on deaf ears. I don't know what it is. You're looking for a response. You're looking at what that's crazy. That shouldn't be happening. And yet we got world-class treatment, world-class commissioning. Now, is that really true? When we got a population that's not getting the help, that is dying in such terrible, horrible ways, and then it's leaving families and children. Mothers are gone, fathers are gone, uncles are gone, brothers are gone, sisters are gone. There's a lot of bereavement. Even for the bereavement, where do they go? It's kept in the house. You can't take that anywhere because the services, what services? What are the services?
And I think it's what you just said there, Sarah, and it's really, really important that we look at that knock-on effect, because there is nowhere to go. I remember the first time I walked into an NA meeting with my husband about 3 or 4 years ago, and the first thing someone said to me is that if you're going to stick around here, make sure you buy a black suit, because there's a lot of death here and you'll be going to a lot of funerals. And that never left me. Next slide, if that's okay, Ed. So again, just wanted to reinforce the numbers because for some reason people like a lot of data. So here it is. Sohan, do you want to go through those numbers? But I think it's really important we recognise that people disengage, not because they're unmotivated, it's because they don't feel that the services are safe and they don't feel that they're built for them. So I don't think anybody would go into a room when they are the most vulnerable they've been and go somewhere where they don't feel safe. I don't think anybody in this room would be able to do that either. So why do we expect a population of people to do that?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Yeah, I mean, we can read the numbers, but sometimes we got to hear the numbers as well. Black people are 4 times more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act, and disengagement rates are up to 3 times higher than white British clients. 80% of UK services report involving lived experience, but less than 15% include paid, resourced leadership roles. Stigma and shame contribute towards 40 to 60% of early disengagement. Higher relapse rates without cultural safety in generic services is from 60 to 75%. And Black adults are 40% less likely to complete addiction treatment successfully compared to white adults.
And just that first one. So I just want you to imagine this scenario. You're a black man. You're at your most vulnerable. Your mental health is suffering. So you decide to call the mental health services. Or you're acting out, somebody calls, knowing that actually when you call for help at your most vulnerable, what is more likely to happen is the fact that you will get detained and put in prison and be, arrested. Now, I want people to just sit with that at the moment. When you are at your most vulnerable, there is a likelihood that you will be arrested for struggling with your mental health. And that is what we're working with. And this is why people don't engage, they don't trust the system, and we have it within our power to do something about this. Did you want to add anything else to this, Sohan, or shall we move to the next slide?
Yeah, let's move to the next slide for now. We'll come back to it and maybe later.
So I think it's really important, the work that I do, and I think, Sohan has so much experience. He's a fountain of knowledge, but I really love this quote by Gabor Mate, because too often we put that onto the people and we don't actually ask why the pain, right? No, I have never met somebody that suffers with addiction and said, do you know what? I just really love to party and I just fancied it. It always comes from a level of pain. So what we have to look at is actually addiction is often the response to unprocessed trauma. So whether that be personal, cultural, historic, collective, generational, you'll be hard pushed to find someone that doesn't have a story of trauma underneath. So what we need to start asking is not why are they an addict? We need to ask them what that pain is. And what we're not doing is we're not healing that pain. We're not looking at actually where that comes from. So we can go to the next slide. So, we look at this as a healing journey, right? So it's really critical that we look at how the system defines recovery in the first place. It is shaped by whiteness. It is shaped by colonial thinking. And the system treats it as if it's a personal failure. It removes faith, family, spirituality from the recovery process. It ignores any intergenerational and migration trauma. It blames our communities for the disengagement, which isn't fair. We are, and so, and you can talk about this, but the majority of people are framed as hard to engage. We're not hard to engage. We're here and we've always been here. But when we have Western psychology that dominates, and we're looking at actually the recovery model itself, how it has been shaped, we're not, we're not hard to engage. You're just not speaking to us, and it's not safe for us.
Yeah. And then the other term, Hannah, that's being used, and a lot of people don't like it, is hard to reach. And a response to that is hard to reach services, hard to reach commissioners. But what this is, when they say that we're hard to engage, we're hard to reach, what they're saying is systemic and structural deflection, displacement onto our communities. There's no accountability, there's no ownership. Where are we getting this wrong? How can we fix this? There's none of that. Straight deflection, systemic deflection, systemic displacement.
And we can go to the next slide unless you've got anything else. So when we look at healing, and I want everyone to just kind of imagine now a recovery service, whether it be a rehab, whether it be a service, a charity, whatever it may, and imagine what that looks like now, how it's been set up, how it's been created. Now, when we look at actually global majority folks and we look at what because we believe this is all healing work, right? There is a level of trauma, so we have to heal the trauma, not just stop the addiction. Everyone can, we see transfer addiction happen, we see people relapse because actually there is no healing that is happening here. So when we look at actually the services that have been built, recovery for us is reconnection. It's reconnection to self, culture, family, community, and faith. So actually, when we look at, and I would just use an NA meeting, for example, where you share and then nobody shares back to you. You can't speak. So actually, as global majority folks, when we look at our ancestral roots, we heal through community healing circles. We heal through spirituality, our faith, and integrating it into a part of our life to understand that there is something bigger than us. Intergenerational storytelling through our elders, our faith leaders, our family, and then cultural rituals for grief, repair, belonging. I sat with somebody who was Native American yesterday, and they were talking to me about the chants that they use and how they heal and how they heal as a community. That is what recovery looks like for us. So, as I said, it's reconnection, and we need to realize that this model of best practice, best in class, world class, whatever you want to call it, it's not universal, and actually it's very, very exclusionary.
Mhm. And even like sound therapy, like mantras, for example, prayer and meditation, and sort of kind of faith-led activities. We kind of we use that in our program, and like crystal healing, for example, if a person needs it, for example. But that's kind of seen as woohoo, you know what I mean? Very cultish and that. So we get very negative remarks coming from other providers because of the our nature of healing, what seems to be working in our communities, for example. And we've done some incredible work, rehabilitation, physical healing, organic healing with these Eastern philosophies, Eastern approaches, but they're not accepted or they're not embraced, by the host culture or the psychosocial model, shall I say?
And let's be very, very clear about that. If anybody knows me, they'll know I like to name it. So when there is feedback from other providers that actually that might be woo-woo, please just note that that is racism, that is xenophobia, and it is dehumanization. Because as far as I'm concerned, how dare anybody come and tell us that our indigenous practices, what our ancestors did, are not fit for purpose or are woo-woo. So let's be very, very clear that even within the people that are creating a new system like us, when we have other providers coming in and telling us that it's a ritual, it's whatever, it's cultish, that in itself is racist, and these are the people that are leading other services. So if we're battling against people that are leading other services, what chance do our community have to heal? Next slide, please.
Next slide, yeah.
So this is, essentially what we have at the top is we have a few quotes from the review, but this is really the difference between what we can see here is from the harm to hope. We can have a look at the
Yes.
Came Carol. These are policy, right? Each local area encourages the development and supports a recovery community with grassroots organisations which target local populations, including BAME communities according to local need. Lovely, isn't it? It sounds fantastic. But actually, when we go and look at actually the people have said, somebody who is a global majority, somebody in recovery said recovery is not isolation, it's reconnection. They've said you want our lived in experience, but you don't want to give us leadership, funding, or decision-making power. We share our stories and our trauma, but nothing changes, and it feels like extraction and not care. So if anybody actually wants to shout out, do we feel that actually what is more powerful and where is it working? Where are those policies being? Because if those policies were in place and they were working, if we actually had a system that will promote equality and meet the needs of the community, particularly those who have not received an effective service in the past, including people from ethnic minority backgrounds or women, why are our communities still feeling this way? Because as far as we're concerned, like it's a whole load of words on a piece of paper that mean absolutely nothing.
So if I can just add this, this is the difference between policy language and lived reality. These are not small gaps, they're chasms.
100%. We can go to the next slide. So we started to look at actually what is it that we need then, and what we said is actually if we decolonize healing, it decolonize recovery as well. So we are not looking to tweak the system, we're looking to redesign it. And this looks like embedding the healing into the recovery and actually looking at cultural safety that is embedded throughout the process. And we look at honouring multiple healing frameworks. And that means going back to Indigenous ways of healing. That goes back to looking at actually the way in which communities heal. We look at lived in experience in service design. And when I say lived in experience in service design, I don't mean that we start pulling out people's trauma, because what we do is we re-traumatize people. Because Sohan is over 20 plus years still sharing his experience. That's not okay. It's re-traumatization. We need to look at the systemic trauma that exists and continues to exist. And then we are looking at collective restoration over individual fixing. This has to be collective. This has to be a community coming together for collective healing and collective liberation and collective recovery and collective healing. We as a community do not recover individually. We recover in community. We use our elders, we use our faith, as we saw in the previous slides. But it's really like, this may feel really innovative, but it's not. It's just repair. This is what our communities have always needed. They've always needed this, and they just haven't had it. It's not, some big thing that we've just found and gone, oh my God, this is really innovative. This is our indigenous practices. This is repair, and this is what we need to do to move forward. If we are all serious about saving lives. I've just seen a question from Paul. Paul, global majority. So BAME is highly is a term that we do not use anymore. It's been we've spoke about. There's been many articles about actually how Black and brown people do not want that term used. So we are still working through language. You know, it's always evolving, but also ethnic minority. We're not a minority globally. We are not. So we have reclaimed the term global majority because that is what we are. We are the global majority, and actually we are only a minority in systems that have been designed by colonial practices and whiteness, essentially. So, you know, we reject the term BAME, and we reject the term ethnic minority or minority ethnic. We are not a minority, and we are much bigger than that. We are actually the global majority, and that's why we have to question why our voices are not heard. I hope that helps.
Good points, Hannah.
So, Han, did you want to add anything to this slide at all?
No, I think we go on to the next slide for now.
So, slide 14. So, when we start looking at lived-in experiences, I think everybody will know about, you know, extractive, how we mine in its kind of literal sense. So, what this is and what we're experiencing at the moment is the lived-in experience equals trauma mining. So, what this means is that we have the system takes the pain, turns it into reports, uses it to secure funding, but nothing happens. So what we need to move to is a place where stories are actually extracted without action. This is what's happening, and what that is that is exploitation. So emotional labor is consumed, and if anybody shares their experience over and over and over again, you have to realize how traumatizing this is. And we can look at theories, we can look at psychology theories as well, and actually how harmful it is. We need to move to a place of co-production. We need to look at shared power. We need to look at systemic change, and we need to look at healing for those who share, but also healing for those that are actually developing these systems and upholding these systems because it serves their community, and it doesn't, you know, with the best intentions, it's okay if it doesn't hit the other community, that's okay. So it's got to include safety, power, there's power sharing, but this has to be I can never say this, reparative action as well. Otherwise, let's be very, very clear what the system is doing, and everybody that participates in it is extracting, it's exploitation. And I don't think anybody would be okay walking out of here today knowing that they exploit a community, because I don't believe everyone came into this field to harm people, but harm is being caused, and everyone in this room is sitting around watching it happen, and they seem to be okay with it.
And we do need co-production, shared power, but we also need shared resources as well.
100%. We
Should
can
we go to the next slide?
Next slide.
The next slide is looking at Backing's justice model. 4 pillars, all interconnected. You take one out and it impacts, you know, the other 3. So at the heart of it is the lived experience and power sharing, and then the cultural competence and supervision, culturally rooted healing and trauma-informed practice, and intersectional, decolonial, and future-focused systems. You know, we over the years we've identified areas that that are effective in engaging and bringing about kind of holistic and wholesome healing, and people are kind of getting well. You know, we've got a really kind of good rooted sort of model here, and I know there's other similar organizations I could say, like in Tottenham, you know, Lawnray's organization, you know, Bubic, bringing unity back into the community, for example, you know, very similar justice model. And then we've got the newest developing LERO as well, Free and Recovery in Leicester. We can maybe come back to this a little bit later, you know, but I just wanted to kind of give an overview of it for now. I don't know if you want to add anything to it, Hannah.
Yeah, and I think it's just that I'm not sure if we can send this slide out or all the slides after this, but there's a lot in it, and I think just read through it and digest it. But what this model shows is actually what we currently have is not fit for purpose, and it's not about tokenism. This is structural change, it's systemic transformation, that actually heals because we don't want to move a place where actually addiction is we're continuing the cycle. If we can start healing people, then actually maybe the cycle stops. And that's something. So this is real. This is not tokenism. This is real structural systemic change. We can go to the next slide.
And there's something just to add to that previous slide. You know, people, they want to get well, and the secret is helping them to get well, but also to stay well. You know, so they don't come back through the doors again, revolving doors of treatment. And we seem to be getting the same people coming in and out, in and out, in and out. So something is not working there.
100%. So this slide is around kind of what real equity really requires. And I think we have to be very intentional about the structural power shifts, the leadership diversification, the long-term funding, and co-design, not tokenism, and then cultural safety, make sure that's embedded at every stage of the process. Now, I think when we look at certain communities, I will speak for the South Asian community, we are told to just be grateful. So we have a level of healing to do where we actually have to put our head above the parapet and say, and this is why we're here today. But we are looked at like charity. This is not charity. This is actual decolonisation. This is repair. This is looking at a system that has been built and designed this way to continue the harm. So if we decide that we want to stop that and move that forward, because again, this real, like, you know what, they've helped me, they've given us a little bit of funding, let's be really grateful. And one thing I will say to everybody here is never be grateful for living, right? The world owes, we all deserve to be able to live and have access to the services. We are not a charity. And this is when we are seen in that way, and from a tokenistic point of view, this is when actually more harm is caused. So it's not really about being included into a broken system, because the system is broken and it's broken for everybody. And I just wanted to be really clear, what we're looking at is a system that isn't just for global majority folks. If we get this right, this helps everybody.
Everybody. Yeah.
So this is about, I can give you an example. So if we have somebody that is hard of seeing, so let's say they're sight, and we put a sign up there with bigger letters so they can see it. Now that's going to help everybody, because you know what, you might be able to sit a bit further back, might walk us further, you know where you're going. But that's to help one person, but that will help everybody. So we need to start looking at how we do that. And that's not being, we don't want to be included into a broken system. How do we redistribute power? And when I say redistributing power, I mean, who is making these decisions? Who are you bringing into the room? Whose Indigenous experiences are we taking into account? How are we opening our minds to look at the way that we actually heal and what recovery means and the trauma that comes with it? And ultimately, this is our responsibility to all repair the harm that has been caused, and from a system that essentially harms us all. Because if it didn't harm everyone, we wouldn't all be in the room right now. But it's not equitable.
Yeah, it has to work for everybody.
And I'm going to use an example here from my own, and I don't know if Jit is in the meeting, but Jit set up and sorry Jit, I'm talking your business, but Jit set up a meeting in Leicester that I've been to a few times, an AA meeting, and it is a culturally competent, and actually there is several languages that are spoke there, right? And what I found, and I've seen this across my career, is that when that space was created for people that could come and express themselves in their language, they could be among community. The amount of white people that come in there and feel like they are part of that community as well, and there is no issue. So the questions we have to ask is that when global majority folks create a space and decolonize that space and just do what's right for the people within the framework that they've already been given, white people can come into that and feel like they belong. But why is it not the other way around? Why do global majority folks feel like they can't walk into a room and they do not belong? And that is the question that we have. So when we know that actually global majority folks can create spaces and create systems where everyone feels welcome, why are they not sitting and why are they not making decisions? Why are we not looking at that power shift? If somebody can create a system that works for everybody, but you still have people that are creating it that work for a few, why are we doing that? And I just want to leave that question with people as we go to the next slide.
Yeah, just let me add something quickly. So we've got another slide or two, so we'll be done with the presentation in the next 4 or 5 minutes. You know, backing as an organization was particularly kind of set up because of the underrepresentation and communities that wasn't coming into mainstream. And what we've noticed is in the last couple of years, you know, third of the service users are from the white British community, that are accessing our services now. We don't turn anybody away, but we do specialize in particular underrepresented groups, and that because they need representation. So it's the phenomena that we're seeing. What Hannah was talking about. Couple of the things that they're drawn to in our model is, one is the spirituality, the other one is that kind of family-centered environment, and then that care and compassion, that kind of non-judgmental love. Love gets mentioned so many times, and again, love in mainstream, right? Yeah, isn't given the credit that it needs to. Broken people need love. Broken people need healing. They need compassion. They need that kind of family synergy energy around them. They need sense of spirituality to reconnect, with their inner selves that are broken and fragmented. So I'm going to go to the next slide, just tie this into a next slide, Ed, and I think this one more slide after this. So our challenge to the system, and if I can say this, we know what works. We got evidence, and we got history, we got track record. Where the problem lies is around needing long-term funding for community-led models like ours, for example. So if there's a big issue underrepresentation across the country, we've got 3 organizations that are community-led, grassroots-led. The level of experience and knowledge that can be used to engage with other communities that are not engaging. That quote from Dame Carol Black's review, and then the from Harm to Hope a quote. Very little of that is happening. There's nothing happening from mainstream. So what we need, Rob, we don't need small 1-year funding, 6-year funding. We need long-term funding as effective community models, and we need to be part of that ring-fenced, protected funding rather than funding given to mainstream, and then we have to be subcontracted. We have to compromise our model, the way we work, our practice gets compromised, and the 2 approaches get convoluted. We want to practice in the way we know is effective, and we want to have that autonomy. We want to give people choice. But where the problem is local funding, drug and alcohol funding, we don't get that. If we do get it, it's very little. It's an afterthought. It's a tokenism. It's a tick box. And we don't want to play tick box games. We don't want to be tokenized for the sake of small pieces of funding, because we are complicit in the very systems we are challenging, very systems that are broken. We don't want to add to the brokenness. We want to help repair and rebuild, but also at the same time create alternatives. People should have alternatives. People should have a choice.
And this challenge to the system, it's just be really clear. This isn't about waiting for permission. We're no longer waiting for permission. This is already happening, and it's being built right now.
And I think the last quote, you want to finish on that last quote? It's your quote.
Yeah. So again, this is just sorry, it's the next slide, if that's okay. Equity isn't about inviting us in. It's about rebuilding the system so no one gets shut out. And we need to look at, and I think for me personally, I haven't put it on the slide, but this session, and I just wanted to give a shout out, because there are so many people here who are even on this call, for the ones who are here healing in plain sight, and the ones who have, and Sohan used that word, that have chosen love, even when the systems have showed and the world have showed that they don't love them back. And they are the people that are creating this. They are the people that are being excluded, but they're here anyway. So I think it's really important that we honour and we shout out to all the people here, like Sohan, like can't remember who else I saw here, that are here. You know what? The world doesn't love us. It's quite clear. The system doesn't love us. But do you know what? You're here, you're healing, and you're choosing love, and you're choosing community anyway. And please be proud of yourselves, because I'm proud of you too. And I think the overall crux of this is we're no longer waiting. We're no longer watching our communities die at the hands of the system. So we're already building the new standard, and here we are. So either people can come on the journey with us, but we're not stopping, and we're not letting this happen any longer.
Thank you, Anna. Good point to finish. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ed.
Okay, I will stop sharing, and I will give you a confession that my inability to start recording until about slide 5 is not ideal for the people watching this back later. So what I'll do is after we finish, I'll record a separate part 1 with your first, because I think your first 5 slides I can recap and they speak for themselves largely, and then we'll people will then join you in the second part. So apologies for that, but it shouldn't affect us too much. So what I want to do now is, I mean, that's an incredible presentation, very really interesting. I thought there were a lot of issues raised, a lot of questions. I loved the passion and the wisdom that comes from what you've just presented. Let me open it up to a wider discussion. Are there particular questions or issues anyone wants to raise to start us off? Just, I mean, if you can find the hand button, put your hand up, or just call out if you can't, because we can manage it.
Can I just say as well before, there is no such thing as a stupid question, or if you're not sure, like, we are all here to, we're all here for a reason. So bring anything to the table. If you feel like it might be a silly question, there's no such thing.
And if we don't have any questions, comments, contributions, because everybody's voice matters here. Yeah, so
Paul's actually got his hand up.
Paul's got a physical hand. I love that.
Physical hand.
Yeah, I have a Zoom disability, I'm afraid, so I
You're not the
struggle
only
with
one, don't
anything
worry.
more than getting onto the thing. I'd just like to thank Hannah and Sohan for what is clearly a really well thought through and structured presentation. I am in Staffordshire, which has very few pockets of the sort of global majority. I can probably, in the last 4 years since we set it up, probably count on possibly slightly more than one hand the number of people who've come in with clear differences in their faith to start with, because again, we have lots of people who come in with no faith, no spirituality, and often lots of problems around when we talk about a spiritual solution. They've got prejudice a bit against that. But we are just so I suppose there's a couple of things. One is a broader point for the clearer, I suppose. Sohan, for yourself, this might not be a question for today, but I think it's really would be helpful in the future. How do you keep the passion after 30 years? Because what happens with me is that I notice there's 2 types of people who complain: people who will complain about anything, and people who are complaining, as you've just done, because the system is broken. However, what I need is other allies, because I feel like a lone nutter. I feel like the person who's seen as a troublemaker in meetings when I'm saying, but we're not set up like that. And that's across the Clero, never mind any particular issues where the system's not been set up. The system's failing everybody. And I'm not aware of your particular situations, but everything that you had on there, possibly with some cultural sensitivities. I mean, the fact that your husband, Hannah, is in rehab and hasn't had his faith discussed and his faith needs is just, it's almost like saying he's got a wheelchair and there's no ramps, is what I'm hearing. So I wanted to thank you for that, but I think there's a lack of professional curiosity within the system. People don't want to understand. They're not seeing it as how wanting to understand things. So a classic would be talking to professionals about 12-step fellowship and FAMA, and they'll say, oh yeah, I know about AA. It was 2 blokes in America, wasn't it? So that sentence tells me they know nothing about a 12-step approach. The solution is definitely the community, and what I'm keen on in Staffordshire with Chase Recovery, we operate out of 2, soon 3 areas, is to keep it local. So when they're asking us to go and develop other areas, it is about developing them and then devolving them to that community. Because even if it's 20 miles away, there's different sensitivities, whether they're cultural or otherwise, geography, finances, whatever. And thank you so much for clarifying the global majority. I think it was an important question, because the global majority to me said people who might have been described as BAME in the past. And I'm also really grateful that you said that's an old term, because I'm not up to date with, and there isn't, I'm not representing the community where I need to be more culturally aware than I am. It's not an issue for us at the moment, but but we need to be aware and ahead of the game. But the other thing is that I thought you were talking about the global majority of the way that the system has been set up to meet the needs of Western culture and Western's thinking and Western psychiatry. And I have done some work many years ago in mental health, and the overrepresentation of particularly Black, African, Afro-Caribbean men is just shocking. And that was 30 odd years ago, 40 years ago, and I don't think it's changed. So I really helped. I thought it was wonderful, the mix of stats as well as you then chunking it up to certain bits that you wanted to discuss. Right, I'll shut up. Thank you again.
No, I just wanted to something you said around, not having the community, just looking at stats, but also looking at my own lived experience with my husband. My husband wasn't an addict until trauma led him into the criminal justice system. And if we then start looking at, and he's neurodivergent too, so if you start looking at actually who is in the criminal justice system, who is overly represented in there, because actually we then have to look at that's a whole different conversation about the decolonisation of the criminal justice system. So they do exist, Paul. They are in your area. They just don't feel safe enough to come to you.
Yeah, so I was just going to give an observation from history, like sort of my work history, about when things are being done differently. Now, at the time, so I worked in substance use for quite a while. Obviously, I worked for a specialist family and carer service, but historically, I'm a drug and alcohol worker. That's what my sort of experience is. But so a long time ago, when I first started work, there was still sort of like specialist GPs up here doing sort of opiate clients. Now, one of the things so that was my first job. Now, one of the things that was noticeable at the time, and it was a particular group of people. So there was quite a few people attended that service who were from the sort of Kurdish and Iranian communities, and they would come there. Now, the specialist GP, everybody who went there it was for opiate users only. So, but people from that community did attend. Now, as far as I can make out, when that service stopped and it just went to be a generic substance use service, quite a lot of the people from them communities stopped attending. So it was almost like there was something, when it was seen as a GP practice that also dealt with substance use, the group seemed to attend, and when it became a substance use service, quite a lot of them stopped. Now, I wasn't in a position to sort of like research the numbers, and that's just sort of an observation rather than anything else. That actually there is ways of doing things differently that seem more effective for some communities.
Thanks, Liam. Excellent point. Larry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. And so, and I went on a bit of an emotional journey with that. I started looking at them numbers and thought, I never knew that. And, I think like I've worked in the game a long time, and, I'm the all-seer and the all-knower, and actually I know nothing. I think it really struck me, some of the figures you put on there. I think the way you presented them as well, really quite powerful. You kind of done us with the numbers and then went on this emotional journey with you. And I felt a little bit of guilt thinking, I've never looked through that lens, and bloody hell, I've never thought of it like that. A couple of things that stood out for me about stigma and shame, and especially some of that around cultural inequality. 40 to 60% of early disengagement from treatment services. That blew my mind. I was like, Jesus. And we look at the attrition rate anyway, and you look at how much of that is contributing. I just think, my days, it's unbelievable. Something you said as well about we tell our stories, we share our trauma and we share our pain, but we don't get any healing. And that's not care, that's extraction. That just went boom. Like just, whoa, I felt that one and made a note of that and took a photo of the slide as well. And something you said, Hannah, at the end as well, when you was talking to Paul, and these people do exist in our communities. They're not hard to reach. They just don't feel safe. And I just, Oh my God. So there's a bit of an emotional journey I went on with it, but I thought, you know what? It was so well presented. I can't wait to see the slides if they're shared. I know that as well. And I just want to thank you both personally. So I know I've known you for a long time and I just feel the pain in your words and the way you talk. And it was quite moving for me. I just want to say thank you very much.
Bless you, Larry. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Sorry, I've forgotten your name. Number 666008 is all I've got on there. You come in, your number's up.
Sorry, is that me, Ed?
It is you.
Yeah, apologies. I was just trying to grapple with my own personal emotions because I'm so disgusted and embarrassed, if I'm honest. You know, I've been in recovery now 20 years myself. Someone is the very man. His service saved my life. I think I was probably one of the first service users in Backing. So to be a service user of that time, and then be given the opportunity to become a volunteer eventually, and you know, work really hard because there was no funding with Backing in the beginning. It took at least, I think, probably 18 months. So from coming from a background of a corporate business, financial services, you know, I wasn't your traditional, you know, sleeping in the doorway type of addict. I was a posh addict, you know, how I saw myself at the time. But I had a set of skills, and so on. You know, when I eventually the penny dropped, and you know, we talked about spirituality. You know, I was broken, I was damaged. You know, the people within the Backing service carried me until I could get to a place where I started to understand myself. But the journey to get to that place and the lack of cultural identification, you know, being passed from pillar to post to different services, who just couldn't engage with me. You know, what they'd see on paper is a, you know, former bodybuilding, doorman, security, black crack cocaine user, and they'd run away, you know, and they'd go and find a tokenistic support worker, somebody who looked like me. But unfortunately, even then, even though they looked like me, it was almost like they had forgotten where they'd come from. So I could see the colour, but I couldn't understand them, because there wasn't no identification in terms of the narrative. And it's not to be disrespectful to those support workers and those services. That, you know, there's a saying, you don't know what you don't know. And to come back in, having been a support worker and now being the business development manager, to take the service to a whole different level, which means I've come with 20 years of a lot of skills in terms of working in statutory services and all the rest of it, and I get it all, but it really saddens me that we're still in exactly the same place, if not worse. You know, I have sat back and over the last 4 months in post, and it's almost like I'm relearning, but then I had to down tools, because everything that I thought I was going to be learning in terms of the equality, in terms of, you know, in particular Black and Southeast Asian service users, I might as well just sit still because nothing's changed. It's embarrassing. You know, I go on these meetings, and no disrespect to your skin color, but I sit in these meetings, I've still not seen any transition of Black males, females, Asian females within the structure of senior management, the decision makers. We've still got the same kind of design of people making decisions, sat in their ivory towers, tend to be very middle class, and they're there not asking for any consultation of people who are LERO or even have had any sort of experience in their own personal lives in terms of engaging with people from different ethnicities. When you speak to them, they'll come out with, oh, well, I went to college with a particular Black person or an Asian person. And, well, really? It really saddens me that in a society which is so diverse, you've got one Black friend or one Asian friend that you can refer to as a person that you once engaged with. And, you know, we can say geographically, some people live in areas where that is not happening. But in your personal life as senior practitioners, if that's what your friend circle looks like, but then you're supposed to be representing the community without any consultation from those backgrounds. You know, if someone mentioned CLG or CGL or whatever they want to call themselves these days, and it's no disrespect, but I sat there at the DDN and I watched how they used and exposed a Black service user on stage of what I say, and went, really to town with this guy in terms of using him as a poster boy to demonstrate how amazing their service is in terms of how they've been working with one particular black person. And the reason I say that is because I went and spoke to the gentleman afterwards. In fact, I've got his book on my desk here called Homeless in Poetry. And I wanted to kind of get an understanding of how he felt and what was his experience. And he shared it with me, and it was lovely. They've done a cracking job. However, when I asked the service manager for the statistics in terms of how many of these particular people have been a success, then they really couldn't answer because of the embarrassment. So to use somebody as a marketing ploy to demonstrate your work, it really saddens me. It really saddens me that in today's society, that the statistics that have been shown and put to the panel, from Anna, that some of us, we don't know about that. And the feelings that are evoked from those discussions from Solomon and Anna, well, we live like that every day. I've sat here and you could probably see my head bobbling around. It's because I've had a service user on, Caribbean background with mental health screaming in the corridor. And generally, most services would have to probably ask that person to leave. Well, we've not done that. We took her into a room and showed her some love and care and consideration and compassion. So when I look at this, this meeting today, a lot of it is about one of the biggest drives that, LERO, CLERO need to look at in terms of creating a massive impact. And I'm sorry, as you get used to me, you'll find that I'm a very straight talking person. I don't really have time for mincing my words, because the one thing I do know since I've been in recovery is there's a lot of people dying. Lots of people have died. Anna mentioned the black suits. Yes, I can go through a whole list. I wouldn't have enough time in this meeting to go through the names. And if you add Soan's list into that, and I'm sure you guys, you'll see that there are people dying, and the impact of that are the families are suffering. So the information that has been put forward today, I would say that on its own would be a firm indication of the lack of cultural competency and the need for it to be delivered through the services, starting with the stakeholders from the top. So their decision making that they make is not of themselves or bits of information where they've had tokenistic support workers go into the communities and collating the information, or the pockets of bits of funding that they give to organizations so they can start to look at putting together a structured strategic plan, or, to be quite ruthless, is those who are getting the big government money can tick their boxes to say that they've done the work. This is almost like modern day slavery. By going to third sector organizations who are doing the hard graft, such as what James has alluded to, 50 volunteers, it's unheard of. People don't want to volunteer these days. But then when you start looking at trying to provide them with a salary, a wage, especially those who have got lived experience, I know Dot and her organization are very, very powerful when it comes to giving people second chances, and sometimes we have to be in a place where we take those risks. We look at the risk assessments, as I've done in the past, and get the best person for the job, as opposed to somebody coming out of university with no life experience. So I guess where I'm at, and I'm quite passionate about where I want to go with this. We sat in the CLERO meeting the other day, and we talked about how we can make the massive changes that need to happen. And it needs the likes of CLERO to bring in the LEROs so we can get to a place where we have a real strong, robust strategic plan to take to government, and not just have individuals getting frustrated, such as James and other people here who feel they're out in the doldrums on their own because they feel they're on their own. But as a collective, we need to be able to support each other, develop each other, cultivate each other's understanding, bring in organizations who have got years of experience to help develop and train the staff. Because I tell you what, when you're from an African Caribbean background or Southeast Asian background, you get a small window of opportunity to be able to assess as a service user whether or not this is the right place for me. You guys have got your own statistics. You know how many service users of our ethnicities are engaging. And the reality of it, it's appalling. For every 155 white Caucasians that are, and this is through NHS statistics, who are having major issues in terms of alcoholism, the figures there's a massive increased spike in terms of Asian people in particular who are just not accessing the services. Domestic violence, all the knock-on effects of all of that stuff is increasing. It's unseen to us because in the world of treatment, it's not what we specialize in. But to one side, those organizations, those services who are dealing with that, there's record numbers, record increases. So I'll finish off on this because I can go on all day. I'm very, very passionate about wanting to take this to a level where we beat the hell out of the government in terms of making them those changes. And maybe beating them up is the wrong terminology, but to educate, to give them the guidance, such as what you've had this morning through Anna's, part.
Oh,
Oh,
cut off in his prime.
I just
Disaster.
wanted to address a few of the points, if that's okay.
I unfortunately we're 2 minutes from past, and I'm aware that I've got a student who's haranguing me for my next meeting at 11:30.
Sorry, Ed. My battery died. I just wanted
Yeah,
to
no, I
off
guessed it was something.
Okay, sorry, my
but
battery died.
that was a brilliant. I mean, that was a great way. Hannah, do you want to? I don't want to cut you off either. Do you want to say something to come back on that quickly?
Yeah, no, it was just a couple because there's a question I think from Paul. So I think Paul, instead of kind of going out and just looking for diversity within your community, the system has to be changed. Me and Sohan consult. What we don't want to do is just go out there and go, okay, I'm just going to fight, because you're still going to cause harm, right? So we have to look at the system. And also, I just wanted to talk about the volunteering. People can't afford to volunteer. And when we have people volunteering on a long-term basis, like James, that was a huge loss to you, but it was still extractive. And when you don't have funding, that's what happens. Again, we still perpetuate harm. Everyone that comes in should be paid, right? Or they should get something out of it. Otherwise, it is still extractive. What we're doing as well, we're still upholding a system. And then I think I just wanted to highlight this whole look for the similarities, not the differences. And I think 666, I didn't catch your name, sorry. With Sohan, you were just saying around kind of what people walking into a room, but we need, and South Asian people are also watching the world happening. Trans people are watching their rights being taken away. We are seeing genocides happening. I have seen people, my loved ones, carry their children in plastic bags. Now, if that is not going to make someone drive themselves to addiction or relapse, but we don't talk about that stuff. There is genocides going on. There are people being mass murdered across the globe. These are people. So yes, we must talk about religion. We must talk about politics, because people of the globe majority, our lives are political, where there is direct attacks against us. So we have to. So one bit of information is, don't just try and go out there and find, consult with us, right?
Yeah.
Invest in us, because at the end of the day, put us in front of people that need to do it. You need to be our allies. You don't need to go and try and do it when everybody here has gone, oh my God, I didn't even think of that, right? We have to decolonize our own minds before we go out there. Otherwise, all we're doing is perpetuating more harm.
Hannah, that's brilliant summary. Thank you very much. And Sohan and Hannah, thank you for such a thought-provoking, articulate, passionate presentation. I'm going to finish by, you had a slide in there entitled "The Colonization of Healing," and those 5 points on there. So that whole issue is, I fully respect and understand, and is a massive issue. That, I mean, there are places in the world where that is, small efforts are being made. I think particularly of work in Canada with Indigenous populations, and the sort of contribution they're making to redesigning the system. I think of New Zealand and a little bit Australia, but there's so much more we could do. But that slide had 5 points. Addiction treated as a personal failure, detachment from faith, family, spirituality, Western psychology dominates, intergenerational trauma ignored, global majority framed as hard to engage. I think those 5 points apply to our treatment system. And I think people like me in the treatment system need to understand that if we adopted those, the whole thing would be so much better. I genuinely believe that. But this is the argument that we need to keep making. We need to keep understanding the situation. We need to keep talking about it. We need to harness the passion. because some of the points that made, it would be better for everyone. Hannah, the point that you made, it's better for everyone if we get this sorted out and redirected and repurposed. I'm going to stop there because we've slightly overrun. Thank you so much.
Just before I go very quickly, I just want to say the Art to Reach community, okay, statement's been out for a long, long time. And I remember someone saying, you know, it's not hard to reach, it's easy to ignore.
Fair point. I mean, absolutely. And that point's well made. I think, guys, thank you so much. I think we need Paul's point about what do we do. I think that's part 2 of this webinar is starting to direct actually specific tactics and strategies that can be used. But for that moment, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you next month at the next masterclass. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Hannah.
I've got my email address in there if anyone wants to connect, or if anyone has any extra questions for me or Sohan, I've got my email address.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.